This week on For the Record, we sit down with the head of public education in Wisconsin and an office dedicated to keeping kids safe. Plus, as Wisconsin's highest court welcomed a new justice, it's also saying goodbye to another, what the shift of power could indicate. And money problems for Dane County. Where did $30 million go, and what's at risk?
We now present For the Record.
Welcome to For the Record. I'm Elly Laliberte. Well, Wisconsin schools returned this week, so we're starting off by checking in with the office that oversees public education in the state. Now, this year, the State Department of Public Instruction is updating the way it grades schools and districts. Now, I spoke with State Superintendent Jill Underly about that change. Thing I want to touch on here is these changes that we're seeing to the way your office is looking to change the way it grades schools and districts. I know you faced some criticism last summer to changing the benchmark for testing standards and the way that those were looked at. So why this change, and are you expecting any criticism on this one as well?
Yeah, so I think, again, it's just really important for your viewers to understand that these are two different things. So what we're doing this time is it's the report card. So school districts and individual schools get that report card annually. And so it's just really important to understand what these report cards are for. And they're not assessment scores. Report cards and the way data is measured is actually in state law. And assessment scores are just a piece or a component of these overall report cards. So there's multiple points of data. And the whole point is that a lot has changed, I guess. I could say really since these were first rolled out 15 years ago, again, in state law. There's been new laws, there's been new testing, there's different ways of measuring student success and priorities. And because of the way these metrics have evolved, updates were overdue. If we're going to be able to understand where our schools need more support, we really needed to just adjust and make sure that we were following the best ways of measuring student success and priorities.
So it sounds like you think a lot of folks will be on board with this update.
I do. We've consulted with our partners in the legislature. They were expecting it. And when you think about, just the trajectory of the past 15 years, we've had, of course, a couple different times in there where we didn't assess. And I think it's going to be interesting when we look at where we were before the pandemic and then where we are now 5 years out. And, where our schools are making progress and where they need more support.
And so you were just reelected to a second term back in April. And at the time you said your biggest priority was getting the budget passed. Now that that's happened, are you satisfied with that going into the school year?
There's always room for improvement, right, in everything we do. And the budget, I look at it as a starting point. I know that there was a lot of negotiation on both sides, making sure that, we were able to get resources to everybody. And there's a lot of needs, I get that. But this is the first time in 15 years where Wisconsin school districts are not getting an increase in revenue. And the burden is going to fall on our local communities.
And so kind of keeping on this funding theme, moving to the federal level, the Trump administration has threatened some school funding based around DEI programs, things of that nature. Would DPI comply with certain changes to keep federal funding to help offset maybe some of that state funding that you say you don't have right now?
Yeah, well, I'll be very clear. Wisconsin schools already follow the law. So the laws that are there, that are passed by Congress, we are already in compliance with those laws. So, at the end of the day, kids just want to learn, teachers just want to teach. And, it's really, we all want every kid to feel safe and belonging in their school. And so, our schools are doing everything that they're doing, and they're following the law and doing so.
And so kind of keeping on that following the law, if there were federal immigration raids in schools, that's been a big conversation, especially at the end of last school year. Is that something that districts within the state would have to comply with? Can you provide some insight there?
Yeah, our school districts all have policies on, what to do in these situations. They're never going to release a kid to anybody when they shouldn't be releasing a kid to. And so really, it's just, again, we follow the law as they are written, through Congress and passed. And we trust our local school districts to make these decisions and follow their policies.
And so as the Trump administration is attempting to dismantle the Department of Education, how can DPI provide stability for the 400 districts it oversees in our state?
Yeah, I mean, we are just doing everything that we can to make sure that we're communicating well with our school districts as to what's coming out of the federal government. There's a lot of talk about returning, education back to the states. And so what we're doing is we're just ensuring that, we're trying to make it as seamless as possible. We're trying to maintain some of the programs that came from the federal government, like green schools or blue ribbon schools. But we're doing what we can in order to just make sure that everybody understands where they stand on funding. We were waiting on our funding for certain federal programs, and we finally got those grant award notices over the summer, like in late July. So we're just doing everything we can to just make sure that the lines of communication are open with our school districts, and so that there's no surprises going forward.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
You bet. Thank you.
And this week, Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Susan Crawford heard her first case on the bench. This after Elon Musk's multi-million-dollar gamble to influence April's state Supreme Court election. Justice Crawford's election victory cemented a 4-3 liberal majority on the Wisconsin court. Her first case was centered around the Fourth Amendment and whether a person is entitled to a reasonable expectation of privacy with data uploaded to a Snapchat account from their phone.
How's that different than a landlord-tenant situation? The tenant didn't create the apartment, does not maintain the apartment, has a relationship probably under a lease that allows that landlord to enter the apartment.
Crawford is not the only change to the bench. Conservative Justice Rebecca Bradley decided to not run for re-election. Now, in a statement, she writes in part, quote, "The conservative movement needs to take stock of its failures and identify the problem and fix it. I will not seek re-election to the Wisconsin Supreme Court because I believe the best path for me to rebuild the conservative movement and fight for liberty is not as a minority court member." And in D.C., lawmakers are already off to the races to avoid a government shutdown. Congress returning from its summer recess to face a September 30th funding deadline. Democratic leaders are calling for a bipartisan meeting, but some Republicans are threatening to go it alone.
Under the Senate filibuster rules, Democratic votes are going to have to be at the table, but we have to get spending under control here in Washington to get this country back on track.
Also at the nation's capital, Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. testified before a Senate committee. The previously scheduled Senate Finance Committee hearing comes a week after the firing of the CDC director and the resignations of several high-profile agency officials.
We are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at CDC. They did not do their job. This was their job to keep us healthy.
Thank you,
and I need to fire some of those people to make sure this doesn't happen again.
Now, after that hearing, Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin quickly offering to help RFK Jr. pack up his desk.
When you fire people at the CDC, there's no one there to help communities deal with public health emergencies like lead poisoning. And I should know, because that's the exact situation that happened in Wisconsin when children in Milwaukee public schools were exposed to lead paint in classrooms, and no one was there at the CDC to answer the phone.
Now, the Trump administration continues to defend Kennedy, even as public health experts sound the alarms over new guidelines restricting eligibility for COVID vaccines. And the Wisconsin judge accused of helping a man evade arrest by U.S. immigration agents in her courtroom will stand trial in December. Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan is charged with concealing an individual to prevent arrest and obstruction. Her trial is set to begin December 15th and is expected to last about a week. Now, Dugan has pleaded not guilty. She faces up to 6 years in prison and a $350,000 fine if convicted of both counts. When we come back, why Dane County is short roughly $30 million and what is it doing to fix it? That's next on For the Record. Welcome back to For the Record. Now, after asking voters for extra money last year. Madison Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway unveiled her 2026 executive capital budget on Tuesday. Now, during a press conference, she said the budget is $285 million, but that's $73 million lower than what was originally requested by city agencies. Now, some of the projects that are prioritized include $33 million for street reconstruction, $27 million for the park system, and housing is another big part of that budget, with a focus on Madison's public housing development known as the Triangle.
Government's job is to invest in the basic infrastructure that allows our economy to thrive and people to have a high quality of life in Madison. And we're here today at the Imagination Center because we know that libraries are critical infrastructure for a thriving community.
But that's actually not all. We're also expecting the city's executive operating budget. Now, that focuses on things like personnel, and that'll be released around October 7th. You'll remember last year, that budget faced a $22 million deficit. But this year, the money problems fall more on Dane County. I sat down with County Board Chair Patrick Miles to talk about the roughly $30 million shortfall. How did this gap happen? What caused this?
Yeah, so it's a culmination of several circumstances. We've had years now of inflation that have outpaced our ability to raise revenue due to levy limits. Sales tax revenue have not been what we had hoped. And then cost of compensation increases, driven in large measure by significant increases in healthcare costs, are some of the more major areas. And then this happens for us every year. We face ongoing underfunded state mandates that are challenging. And now on top of all of this, we have the uncertainty of what's going to happen with federal funding. And we receive a significant amount of federal funding. And so that's sort of looming over all of this.
And so I'm hearing a lot of external factors that you say are kind of contributing to this shortfall. Is there anything the county internally could have done to prevent this?
Well, last year, we had anticipated that it was going to be a challenging budget year. We've been budgeting much more closely to historical trends. Where in years past, we've had reserves. We've been building up our reserves, and we just haven't had that room to do that. So last year we didn't provide employees a cost of living adjustment. We reduced our borrowing over the prior year by 37%. So we took some steps to try to mitigate the situation we're in now, and to address what we're facing now. The county executive, at the start of the summer, gave her direction to all the departments to submit budget proposals that reduce their baseline budget by 4%, and not request any new staff or any major capital projects.
And so I remember earlier in the summer, we had a listening session, and I heard from a 911 operator there who said that some of the supervisor roles were at risk because of those reductions that you were just mentioning. So how are you guys planning on prioritizing departments and programs for the county?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a shared objective I have as a supervisor, along with the county executive, to prioritize those critical services and protect. So much of county services are driven by the high quality workforce that we have, and so that's. Our primary effort is to protect the positions we have, but we recognize that to meet the situation, there are several proposed positions in the current year budget that have been unfilled and I'm expecting to be eliminated in the coming budget proposal. But I think, over the last 5 years, we've added a significant number of staffing capacity, especially in 911 and other areas of public safety. So
it sounds like public safety is a priority for the department to maintain services like this.
Well, I think human services represents probably the largest slice of our operating budget costs of all the departments. And we're working with vulnerable populations that if we don't address their needs, it leads to more expensive needs down the road. And so I think that's sort of the priority area, and that followed closely by public safety.
That was Dane County Board Chair Patrick Miles with us earlier. Now, there are 3 department listening sessions for that budget scheduled this upcoming week. Now, Tuesday and Wednesday sessions will happen at the City County Building in room 201. Thursday's meeting will only discuss the Health and Human Needs Committee and will be hosted at the Alliant Energy Center. And next on For the Record, how Wisconsin is protecting kids from school shooting threats. That when we come back. Welcome back to For the Record. Now, the school year may just be getting started in Wisconsin, but already in 2025, nationwide, there have been 150 school shooting incidents. That's according to the K-12 school shooting database. Now, we saw a recent shooting in Minnesota just last week. And these numbers are why Wisconsin developed an Office of School Safety in 2018. I'm joined now by Director Trish Kilpin. Thanks for sitting down with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for caring about school safety.
Yeah. So obviously, we unfortunately had an incident very close to home here in Madison, the Abundant Life School shooting last December that killed a teacher and a student. So how can your office aim to prepare students and staff for a tragedy like this?
There are multiple ways that, that we need to be thinking about the ways that we approach these situations to prevent them from occurring. The Office of School Safety has simultaneously prioritize prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery as part of our efforts to keep students safe. The truth is, targeted violence is preventable. School shootings are preventable, but we have to do many things with sometimes limited resources in order to make sure that happens. And every school has its own approach to how to keep kids safe, but there are some elements that are required by the state. Every school has to have an emergency operations plan, which we call a school safety plan. Every school has a site assessment. We do training and drills, and we make sure that maps are available in case a crisis occurs so that people can respond quickly to those events.
And so are there things this year that we can look for from your office that you're maybe implementing as we head into Wisconsin's next school year?
We know when these shootings occur that they're planned and they're predatory. So we have prioritized making sure that the behavioral threat assessment and management process is something that schools are familiar with, and that they have teams that are trained in order to make good decisions about keeping kids safe. That is something that we do prioritize, and this year we'll be rolling out some new materials for that. But we've trained over 8,000 people here in Wisconsin, even though it's not legislatively required to have a behavioral threat assessment and management team. We know it's a best practice, and so do schools. So they come to us as a resource for that. We also have Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin, and we're continuously growing that program. That's a place where people can report concerns. 82% of the time when there's been a school shooting, somebody knew of the shooter's plan to attack. This provides an opportunity for people to report their concerns early so that we can intervene and prevent violence from happening.
And so I kind of want to touch on some of the funding for you guys to make sure that these programs stay up and afloat. And I believe up until about 2023, you guys were run largely on COVID relief funds. Of course, in this state budget, you are now seeing some general funding. Are you seeing support from both sides of the aisle to continue these, as you say, necessary steps to prevent extreme violence?
Many of the model programs that we use here in Wisconsin, and when I say model programs, they're looked at nationally as exemplars of the types of programming that need to happen for schools to keep them safe. And many of those programs are started with federal grants. Federal grants are great to start programs, but not to sustain them. We were really pleased in the last biennial budget that we did receive bipartisan strong support in giving us the permission to continue those programs by having authority to hire staff in permanent positions. So we're in the process of doing that now, and we will look forward to hopefully having continued support in terms of the funding that we need to sustain our operations.
And so you mentioned earlier in our conversation that there's some things that aren't legislatively required but are best practice.
Yeah.
Are there laws either kind of going through the works right now or that you would like to see that you think would help keep kids in Wisconsin safe?
There are requirements. They're part of the statute, the 11807, which is health and safety requirements for schools. And those are the required elements that we need to see from schools, and they submit to our office. We provide a review and some reflection back on some model practices, places that people could improve if they're interested. But there's a lot of local decision making going on in terms of school safety. There are states across our nation that do have legislation about things like requiring a behavioral threat assessment or requiring things like having SUSO. Here in Wisconsin, we're growing a coalition of people who are interested in that work, and we're seeing a high number of our private and our public schools and our independent schools really collaborating with us and embracing those practices.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us, and thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
For the Record, we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to For the Record. Now, while our main focus here on the show is politics, we just can't ignore the Packers. Now, coming up next is CBS Game Day live from Lambeau Field in Green Bay, where those lucky enough to be at the game can enjoy some new snacks today. Now, that includes a loaded big pretzel, which has sharp cheddar cheese sauce, crumbled brats, fried sauerkraut, beer cheese mustard sauce, and beer mustard. That is definitely a loaded pretzel. The Packers play Detroit at 3 right here on News 3 Now, but first it's the Steelers and the Jets at noon. That's it for us this week. CBS Game Day is next.
This has been For the Record.